Well, at school, and some people try to cyberbully me. They try to get to me with words, but that doesn't really work.
Do you think they're jealous?
Maybe, I don't know.
The name Paris Jackson is tied to one of the most bizarre custody battles in Hollywood history. She was the child bought with an $8 million contract, disowned by her own mother, and turned into a public spectacle by her own grandfather. Far from the lavish upbringing one might imagine, Paris Jackson's life has been a long, grueling existence in a hell of prejudice and cruel scrutiny. Behind all the rumors about DNA and bloodlines, what truth is being hidden? Let's unravel the thorny journey of this young woman's path to adulthood, the $1 million contract, and the oaths in court. To understand Paris, you have to go back to the marriage that created her, a union born not of love, but of contracts. In November 1996, Michael Jackson quietly married a dermatology nurse named Debbie Rowe in Sydney, Australia. They met at the clinic of Dr. Arnold Klein, where Michael had been treated for vitiligo for years. Their wedding cost a mere $35. The richest man in the entertainment industry had gotten married for less than the price of a decent meal in Los Angeles. They weren't in love. Neither of them tried to hide it. Debbie once said she just wanted to help a friend get the one thing he desperately wanted: to be a father. Prince was born in 1997. Paris was born in 1998. By 1999, Debbie had filed for divorce, signed over full custody of the children to Michael, and quietly retreated from public life. It was a story that seemed to have reached the most peaceful conclusion possible. At the time, the media painted Debbie Rowe as a convenient villain in Michael's sad fairy tale. But looking deeper into her disappearance, a question lingered. Was it simply a clause in a contract? Or was it the only way she could protect the children from her own past and escape the storm of public opinion that swirled every time she appeared alongside the Jackson clan? Whatever the reason, her silence inadvertently created a perfect veil of secrecy. But that was only until the California court records were unsealed years later. When the light of truth was finally cast upon it, the picture of her retreat changed completely. The legal documents told a much starker story. In 1999, before the court, Debbie Rowe swore under oath that she hadn't received a single dollar from Michael to have these children. Yet, by 2003, she had signed another agreement to completely relinquish her parental rights in exchange for $8 million and a house in Palmdale. Two contradictory testimonies, one truth buried under canceled checks. No one was prosecuted, no court was troubled. Michael's immense fortune had quietly settled everything. But in the aftermath of those deals, a giant question mark had been unwittingly placed over Paris's very origins. On the surface, Michael had bought himself the peace to be a single father. But beneath that veneer of money and lies, Paris's life was actually being built on a ticking time bomb. She was still safe, for now, because Michael stood as a shield between her and the world. But no one can stand as a shield forever. On a fateful day in June, the shield named Michael Jackson would officially shatter. A god's funeral and a knife from her own kin. On June 25, 2009, Michael Jackson died at his home in Holmby Hills. Paris was only 11 years old. In the moment the world was mourning a musical icon, the media vultures were already circling. Immediately following her father's death, Paris became the target of a relentless hunt. Hollywood didn't treat her like a grieving child. They treated her like an investigative project. Every time she stepped onto the street, dozens of lenses would zoom in on her eyes, her skin, comparing her to every actor, every dermatologist, and every old friend of Michael's. It was a form of systematic emotional abuse, where privacy was brutally stripped away in exchange for sensational tabloid headlines. But horrifyingly, the hunters weren't just the media. The one leading the charge against her identity was her own flesh and blood. On the red carpet at his own son's funeral, Joe Jackson, Michael's father, Paris's grandfather, casually stood before the cameras to promote his new record company. His 11-year-old granddaughter stood just a few feet away, still trying to comprehend how her world had just collapsed, while that man chose to turn his family's grief into a business opportunity. That cruelty continued into 2011, when Joe Jackson appeared on Piers Morgan's show. When asked about his grandchildren, he said they don't look much like Michael. This statement was a fatal blow, indirectly confirming what all of Hollywood had been whispering for a decade, that Michael's children might not be his biological offspring. It was the moment Paris's identity was torn apart for the second time. The first was when Debbie Rowe sold her parental rights. This time, it was her grandfather selling her bloodline on national television. If the world had the right to doubt, at the very least, her family should have been her refuge. But Joe Jackson chose the other side, and he chose to announce it to the world. After Joe, a line of other men began to step into the light, each wanting to claim a piece of Paris's DNA story, with no regard for the emotional scars it would inflict on a teenage girl struggling to survive her father's death. However, amidst the swirling controversy, it was Paris herself who created a moment that left the world speechless. In July 2009, at Michael's memorial service, the world held its breath as the trembling 11-year-old walked onto the stage. For the first time, Paris Jackson was not a child in a mask, not the center of conspiracy theories. She was simply a daughter, standing before millions to say goodbye to the most important man in her life. The moment she broke down in tears, the world was stunned. Her voice was uncannily like Michael's, and the pain in her eyes was the most authentic thing of all, something that could never be faked by any DNA test. But was the sincerity of a child enough to hold back the ghosts of a legacy waiting to devour her life? The ghost of a legacy and a long slide into darkness. The first was Mark Lester, a British actor once famous for his lead role in the 1968 film Oliver. Lester had been a close friend of Michael's for decades. In 2009, right after Michael's death, he claimed he had donated sperm to Michael in the mid-90s. He said there was a high probability that he was the biological father of Prince and Paris. He produced a photo of his own daughter, Olivia, to compare her resemblance to Paris. He offered to take a DNA test. A few years later, Lester quietly retracted his claim. He said he was probably mistaken, that perhaps the sperm came from one of Michael's doctors, not him. The retraction never garnered nearly as much attention as the initial bombshell. The second man was far more dangerous. Dr. Arnold Klein. Klein was Michael's private dermatologist for nearly 3 decades. He was Debbie Rowe's boss at the clinic where she and Michael met. When asked directly on television if he was the father of Prince and Paris, Klein didn't issue a flat denial. He said, "To the best of my knowledge, I am not their father." It was an answer so carefully worded, it left every possibility open. Then came August 2015. Klein posted a side-by-side photo on Facebook of a younger version of himself and Prince Jackson. He wrote a single caption. Interesting. The photo was up for exactly 19 minutes before it disappeared. But the internet never truly forgets. Screenshots spread across the tabloids within hours. 2 months later, Arnold Klein was dead. The official cause was heart failure. He died bankrupt and alone in his apartment. Those close to him later revealed he had been preparing to write a memoir. That memoir has never been found. While the battle for fatherhood played out in the press, someone was collapsing in silence. In 2013, Paris stumbled upon Debbie Rowe's old court testimony. In it, Debbie stated that her children were not Michael's biological children. Paris was 15 years old. She had already spent 4 years listening to the entire world debate whether her father was really her father. And now, the woman who gave birth to her was saying the same thing. She broke down. In a 2017 interview with Rolling Stone, Paris revealed what happened during those years. She had been sexually abused as a child by an acquaintance of Michael's, whom she did not name. She started using heroin. She snorted so much cocaine that it burned a hole in her septum, a fact she publicly warned young people about on TikTok years later. She overdosed on pills, she jumped from heights, She used knives. Before her 15th birthday, she had cut her wrists 7 times. She had attempted to end her own life 4 times. The little girl Michael Jackson had once wrapped in a blanket and carried out of the delivery room was now being suffocated to death by the media. And that's when this story should have ended in the worst way imaginable. But it didn't. The truth behind the mask and forgiveness across decades. There's one question that everyone who has followed Paris's story has asked. Why, after everything that was thrown at her, does Paris still defend Michael to the end? Why doesn't she just give in, acknowledge the rumors, and run from the Jackson name? The answer lies in a detail the world once ridiculed for years: the masks. When Prince, Paris, and Blanket were young, every time Michael took them out, he made them wear masks that covered their faces. Sometimes they were veils, sometimes surgical masks, sometimes bizarrely decorated masks. The world's press mocked him. They called it proof that Michael Jackson was eccentric, paranoid, and unfit to raise children. Paris told the truth in her 2017 interview. Michael knew he wasn't going to live a long life. He had known it from very early on. He didn't cover his children's faces because he was ashamed of them. He covered them so that when they turned 18, when they walked out into the world alone for the first time, not a single paparazzi photographer on earth would recognize them. He wanted his children to have a normal life after he was gone. The whole world laughed at a father for that. Every scar on Paris's arm is a question the world forced a child to answer. 7 cuts for the 7 times she tried to disappear. And every time she woke up, the thing that pulled her back was the memory of the man who put a mask on her. Not out of shame, but because he wanted her to be free when he was no longer on this earth. She learned from her father how to be gracious in the face of the world's flaws. But Paris's forgiveness didn't stop with memories of her father. It extended to the person she once considered the biggest scar in her life, Debbie Rowe. The greatest miracle of Paris's story, ironically, came from the very mother that all of America had once branded the villain. In 2013, after her 4th suicide attempt, Paris woke up in the hospital. The person sitting by her bedside, whom she hadn't truly seen in nearly a decade, was Debbie Rowe, the mother who had sold her parental rights for $8 million. The woman whose testimony had made Paris want to die. In 2016, Debbie was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. During the most brutal months of chemotherapy, only one person showed up consistently at the infusion center. It wasn't Mark Lester. It wasn't the Jackson family. It was Paris. The rejected daughter pushed the wheelchair for the mother who had abandoned her. She sat there for hours, sometimes all day, while the chemicals flowed into Debbie's veins. They didn't talk much about the past. They didn't have to. From that year forward, Debbie Rowe never uttered another word about DNA, about bloodlines, about whether Michael was Paris's biological father. That silence was the debt she paid to the daughter who had forgiven her, the protector of truth. Paris entered adulthood in a way no one expected. Not with tearful interviews, not with a best-selling memoir. She did it with her career and with her actions. She became a model for Chanel. She acted in independent films. She released her debut album, Wilted, which climbed to #1 on the US iTunes alternative chart. She toured with rock bands. She never used her father's name to sell her music. She built her own name from the ground up. Then came 2023. A scene in the Amazon Prime series Swarm alluded to the DNA rumors surrounding Paris. The internet exploded again. A wave of fake DNA videos, created with AI, began to flood TikTok and YouTube. Millions of people watched results that never existed. Paris didn't do an interview to explain. She didn't hire lawyers to make threats. She posted a single line on social media, then deleted it. "You don't get to decide who my dad was." 9 words. That was all she gave the world. By 2026, Paris was no longer fighting the media. She was fighting much bigger battles. In April 2026, Lionsgate released the biopic Michael, starring Michael's nephew, Jafar Jackson. The entire Jackson family backed the film, except for Paris. She publicly called the film a sanitized and dishonest portrayal. She refused to let Hollywood turn her father into a box office product. In May 2026, Paris won a legal victory against John Branca, the longtime head of the Michael Jackson estate. The court ruled that the estate had to return $625,000 that its lawyers had quietly withdrawn as an unjustified bonus. Paris's representative told the press that the estate should be an entity that supports the Jackson family, not a slush fund for lawyers to live out their Hollywood mogul fantasies. Paris doesn't need a DNA test to prove she is Michael's daughter. She has court records. She has the battles that only a true child would fight. She isn't protecting the Michael Jackson brand to make money, the way her grandfather Joe did. She is protecting a father. That is the difference that 25 years of rumors could never comprehend. For more than 2 decades, the world has looked at Paris Jackson as a biological puzzle to be solved. What color are her eyes? What color is her skin? What color is her hair? As if the answer to whether she is Michael's daughter lies waiting in some test tube. But Paris herself gave the answer back in 2017, in a sentence of less than 15 words. She said Michael was her father. He had always been her father. He never wasn't, and he never wouldn't be. DNA doesn't make a father. $8 million in a contract doesn't make a father. A photo posted and deleted in 19 minutes doesn't make a father. A soundbite on national television from an old man trying to sell a few more records doesn't make a father. Fatherhood is made of other things. It's made of running into a delivery room and holding your child before the afterbirth is even gone. It's made of making your kids wear masks for years so that 2 decades later they can walk down the street unrecognized. It's made of teaching a white child with blue eyes that she is black because that is her father's blood. It's made of raising a child to be strong enough to push the wheelchair of the mother who once abandoned her. And it's made of that child, 20 years later, still standing up to fight for the honor of her late father, even when the whole world wants her to let go. If a girl who once cut her wrists 7 times because of the world's words is now strong enough to take on $1 billion estate to protect the truth about her father, perhaps it's time for the media, and all of us, to do something very simple. Leave Paris Jackson alone.